Today on DevOps Clinic, we're discussing salt pillars and grains, so stay tuned. Welcome to DevOps Clinic. I'm Matt, and I'm thrilled to be back with another exciting video. With over 25 years of experience as a Linux system admin, network engineer, and DevOps engineer, along with being a certified salt stack engineer, I'm here to share valuable insights with you. Today, we're diving into the world of salt pillars and grains, unraveling what they are and how they empower DevOps professionals like you. But before we delve into this topic, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, leave your questions, comments, or video suggestions below. Our mission is to equip you with the skills you need to excel as a DevOps engineer or sysadmin. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're facing any challenges. Let's get started. In salt, there are two key concepts that are very similar, pillars and grains. However, these concepts serve different purposes and play distinct roles in salt's functionality. If we take a look at this picture, on the left-hand side, we have grains. Grains are system properties and characteristics that salt collects from the minions. They provide information about the minion's hardware, operating system, network configuration, and other information only the minion knows about. Salt automatically discovers and collects grains upon minion connection and can be accessed during the configuration process. On the right side, we have pillars. Pillars in salt refer to a feature that allow the storage of configuration data in a centralized location. They typically store sensitive or environment-specific data such as passwords, API keys, or other configurations. Think of pillars as information only the salt server knows about, but you want to use on the minions. We quickly glossed over pillars and grains in previous videos, but let's dive in and see some examples. For these examples, we have a simple setup with just a salt server and a couple minions. There's a web server and there's a DB server. So let's go ahead and let's start out with the web server. So if we run salt web star and if we use grains.items, so this is kind of the first place that I always go. And the reason I go here when I'm looking for grains is this shows me every grain that's available, which I find useful if I'm trying to write a salt state and trying to find some information to use. This is going to enumerate through every setting that's available. And you can see it has everything from salt version, Python path, stuff about your operating system, etc. Everything from hardware to network. Basically every configuration that your salt minion knows about. CPU, flags, BIOS, etc. Now, you don't always want to see all that information. Sometimes you just want one piece of information. So if we were to use this example, we're going to still query the web server, but instead of grains.items, we're going to say grains.item, and we're going to ask for the host. Now, host is like your host name, and you can see here it brings back the host name. And now, obviously, we knew what the host name was, but you can also do some neat things with this. Once you've queried it, you know that you can use that grain item in your salt states. If it was called hostname, you wouldn't know that without querying it and testing to find out. Now, one thing to note here, you can see here how it specified the name of the server it queried, the grain key, and then the value that it brought back. Sometimes you don't want to bring back the key name. You already know what key you're looking for. So what we can do is instead of grains.item, you can do grains.get. And this will just bring back the minion name and then whatever value you're looking for. So what if we wanted to do this? So if we were to do all servers grains.get OS finger, and what this is going to do, it's going to bring back the name of the operating system and just list out server name OS. nice and concise, and you can use this for reports. Okay, so one thing to note is when we're looking at the output of salt from the command line, it's usually in YAML format. And whether it's grains.item or grains.get, we may not always want it in YAML format. Maybe we want it in JSON format. So one of the things we can do is let's specify all servers, and we're still going to look for the host, but let's change the output so that it is equal to JSON. And there we go. Just based on that, this makes it nice and easy if you want to do reports and have that ingested by a database or something like that. I know I use this quite often when I'm working with stuff that I need to give to people where they need to process some of my salt data. Now, one of the other things you can do, if we were to look at the web server, and let's look at the grain called DNS. Now, if we look at this, it actually has a lot of information in here, and you don't necessarily always want all that information. You might want something that is a number of levels down in your YAML syntax. Well, what you can do is just by pulling, say, DNS, and we want to go, say, grab the IP4 name servers. If you put a colon and then the next key value, it'll pull just that. Then the next thing you can do is from the command line, if you want just one or the other, you can specify colon 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Just add a number starting at 0 for the item number that you want to pull. This allows you to get very specific, especially once you start to use this in your salt states where you want to pull a specific IP address or a specific value from there. You can dig down and you don't have to just pull from the top of the YAML syntax and then parse through it. You can just specify the path to it. So one of the cool things, once we know what grains are available, it's not just for using in the salt states. We can also use this with what's called targeting. And we briefly talked about targeting in one of the previous videos. And this is from the command line where we want to run a command against a specific set of servers. So in this case, we're going to specify $G after the salt command. And then we're going to, instead of typing in web, let's type OS, because there's a grain called OS. And we're going to specify Rocky. And then we'll do grains.get OS. And so you can see that now in this case we only have 3 Rocky Linux 8 servers, but I was able to target a specific group of servers based on one of the grains. So if you, we'll show this later on, have a grain that's specific to your organization, you can target them based on a role or something like that. But another example would be if we want to target the OS finger, and earlier we saw that the OS finger for these servers is Rocky Linux-8. So you can see that there. One of the other things we can do when targeting is we can use what's called a compound query instead of just a grains query. So if you use capital C, and then you can specify multiple grains. So we're going to say capital G at, and then let's look for the OS family. So this is a grain, and even though they're Rocky Linux 8 servers, they are part of the Red Hat family of Linux. So if we specify Red Hat, and let's look for something else. Let's also look for a grain called OS major release. So it's going to look for the major release, so like 6, 7, 8, 9. It's not going to look for the minor version like 8.1, 8.2, etc. So let's look for 8, and then we'll specify grains.get OS full. And OS full is another name for the operating system. So you can see how you can very easily craft specific targets once you know what the grains are. And one of the things I do at work quite a bit is we've got a mix of different Red Hat based distributions. So CentOS 6, 7, 8, although 6 is gone, 7 is almost gone, and we've got a lot of new Rocky 8 and 9 servers. And I can quickly form a query to run commands against very specific OSs or whatever else. I can specify a query that targets IP addresses or stuff like that as well. So one of the other things we can do on the command line is to set a grain on the host. And as I said, grains are information that the minion knows about, but you can also define your own grains that reside on the server. So let's do this. On the web server, let's do a grains.set. We're going to create a grain called role, and we're going to say the value is web server. And let's do the same thing with our DB server. And let's also do the same thing on our salt server. So, oh, and I forgot to actually set a grain. There we go. All right, so now let's go and query them. So let's say grains.get role. And we can see DB server 01 is a DB server role, salt is a salt server, and web is web server. And one of the things you can also do is, now that we have that set, we could use the grain targeting to say if role is web server. That way you don't have to know the names of all your servers. If you've defined roles for them, you can basically just target them based on those roles. And one of the final things that we're going to do is, on all these servers, we are going to do a grains del key. And what this will do is it'll allow us to delete grains. And you can see here, it says it's deleted them. All right, the role grain is all gone. So one last thing I'd like to show you about grains on the command line. Let's go ahead and set the role grain for the web server again. So we can see that we've set it, and you can see here that the web server is the one that has it. If you're ever interested in finding out what grains have been manually set, and this is not the grains that are set automatically like the operating system and network and all the default stuff that it pulls, these are the ones that you set. You can look in your etc salt folder and you'll have a file called grains, and this is just going to be YAML syntax. You can obviously edit it here and the changes take place immediately, but obviously if we're doing configuration management, we want to do this in salt states. All right, let's jump over to looking at the pillars on the command line. Remember, pillars are the data that only the salt server knows about, and you want to use on the minions. So to save time, what I've done is I've gone ahead and created some pillar data already, and you're going to find the pillar information in /srv/pillar, unless you've altered your configuration, have it somewhere else. So if we look here, we've got a number of files here, and of course the first one is our top file. And this is very similar to the state, where you basically have a top file that determines when a minion comes in what files it can read. So we can see here that we start off with base, and then all servers, they're going to be able to read the defaults.sls or folder. Anything with the DB in the name, it's going to be able to read the db.sls or folder, and web can read web.sls or folder. So let's look at the defaults to begin with. And here you can see it's YAML syntax, and we've just got two keys and values. So foo and the value of bar, foo2 and value of bar 2. And let's look at the DB, and you can see here we've got a number of nested keys and values. So we've got DB is the top level key, and root user, root password with values, as well as MySQL subkey and other subkeys. And then finally, we've got the web server. So we can see top level key is web, and then we've got data underneath. So that way it starts us off with some information that we can use to query. So to query this information, what you can do is, let's say all servers, you can do items. And what this is going to do, it's very similar to the way that the grains work. It's going to pull back all the pillar that's available for these servers. Actually, let's narrow it down just to the web server. So we can see here, it went through all the pillar files and it had access to the defaults, the foo and foo2, as well as the web. And if we were to run this against the database, we can see it has access to the defaults, foo and foo2, and the database values. And the salt server, we can see it only has access to the defaults. And similar to the way that we can query grains, if you want to specify just a single item, you can do pillar.item. So let's do pillar.item foo. And it's going to come back with the key and the value. Or if you don't want to see the key, you can just do a get. So it'll give you the host name plus the value. Now, if you remember when we were looking at the web.sls file, there was a number of nested pieces of information. So if we wanted to query the web server, and let's just say pillar.get web. So this is going to bring back the whole tree. And just like with grains, if we want to specify something like the website version, what we can do is we can use colon and then just go down the tree. So we're in the web YAML, then we're going to go down to say website and then version. And what that'll let us do is get down to the very specific value that we want. All right, so now let's switch gears. Let's move over to where we can use this information in salt states. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've created some salt state configuration just to save a little bit of time. And what we've got is just a simple top file, and it just specifies the web server should get the roles.web. So based on past videos, you know that roles.web will either point to a roles folder with a web.sls file or a roles folder, web folder with an init.sls. So if we look here, we've got a roles folder, we've got a web folder, and we can see there's an init.sls. So let's go ahead and open this. So we've got a configuration right here where we're going to manage a file called root grains_debug. And you can see we're specifying we want contents passed into it. And we're doing double curly brace open and closed. And if we specify salt and then grains.get and then OS finger, and the brackets are important the way they are, this is going to basically go ahead and fetch the grain called OS finger and put it into this file. If that file has something different, it's going to replace it. It's not going to just append it. It's going to make sure that the only content in there is this. So let's go ahead and run this. So we've got another window here with the salt server. And if we do a state.apply, and remember state.apply is going to do from the top down. We could also specify roles.web, but we've only got a single state on this server, so it should run pretty fast. We can see it finished running the state. And let's flip over to the web server, and if we were to look at the folder, we have a grains.debug. All right, so let's cat the grains.debug file, and we can see all it put in there was Rocky Linux-8. So let's look at the next example here. So let's uncomment this. And we can see it's also doing a contents, so it's just whatever is passed after. And we're specifying the same syntax here, grains.get, but we're calling the grain OS finger version, which doesn't exist. So one of the things you can do if you use this syntax here is you can basically say, pull this grain from the minion, and if it doesn't exist, then use this as a default value. So let's save this and we'll run the state. Okay, so that ran. And let's go ahead and cat grains debug 2. And you can see since that grain doesn't exist, then it added my default value in there. All right, so let's move on to the third one. So let's uncomment this. And you can see this time we're not piping it in, we're just doing a single line in here. But the syntax is a bit different. So in this one we say salt grains.get. Here we're just saying grains and then whatever the grain is. And this is useful, you can do this, but if the value doesn't exist, the key doesn't exist, you will get an error. And there's no way to specify a default value with this version, but it is a nice shorthand version if you're sure that that information is there. So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see it applied that to grains debug 3. So clear the screen and grains debug 3, and you can see it's putting OS finger in there. All right, and continuing, let's look at the fourth example. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to manage a file, but instead of passing it in through contents, we're actually going to specify a file on the salt server in with the rest of our salt state code. And it's going to be a Jinja template. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through and parse it, and it's going to render out all the results. So let's go ahead and save the state here. But before we run it, let's open up Files, Grains Debug 4. If we look at this, so this is just a text file, but because we specified the template is a Jinja, it's going to go through and it's going to parse each one of these. And you can see we've got examples similar to what we had in the state file. So salt grains.get host. Here's another one here. These are just 2 grains that are available. We've got FQDN, so your fully qualified domain name. We've also got IP address, but we're just specifying IPv4. And when we were doing the CLI, remember I specified a specific DNS IP address by adding a number, so we can specify, starting at 0, 1, 2, however many IP addresses there are, you can specify specific ones. You can also use the same syntax as our last example, where it's just grains and then the name of the grain. And you can also use the first example, but have a default value. So let's go ahead and let's run this, and we'll take a look at the file. All right, that finished. Let's clear our screen. We'll take a look at debug 4. So we can see that it specified our host name, our domain name, our fully qualified domain, which is host name and domain together, the list of IP addresses that are assigned to this server, the 0 index of this array, and then you can see how we used grains instead of salt grains.get, or you can see how we used it with the default value. And in future videos, we're going to show you a lot of this stuff, how we can use this to manage configuration across our servers. All right, so one last example let's show you is, instead of managing a file, what we want to do is, previously in the command line for grains, we were able to set a grain. And so I do this a lot in my servers when states run. Obviously my top file, I have stuff match on host name, but then what I do is I set a role for each of the servers. That way I can just quickly query, say role web, and have it, affect all the web servers or database servers or whatever. So you can, and it doesn't have to be as simple as that. You can have, based on, location, however you do your kind of infrastructure. A lot of people break things down by, say, data centers or cloud environments or things like that, but you can make determinations as to what this value is and then make it easy to query based on that role. So let's go ahead. We're using grains.present. We're going to save this. Let's go ahead and apply the state again. And this time, let's go ahead and clear the screen. Let's do web star grains.get role. And you can see we set the web role. Okay, so that's grains. Now let's take a look at pillar. So if we scroll down here, the first example we've got here is very similar to the first grain. We were just doing a salt pillar get for foo. If you remember, foo is in the default SLS file. So let's run this. All right, so that ran. So let's go to the web server, and if we cat pillar debug, we can see it just put the value in there, so bar. And that's all that we specified in the config here, is we just wanted the value of foo. And if we do this next example, it's very similar. Now what we're looking for here is foo bar as a key, which doesn't exist, and we've got the default value. And if we run that, it'll be very similar to grains. My default value. And then we'll do one similar to the third example of grains, where we specify all in one line, just pillar, and then the name of the pillar. You can see it comes back with bar as the value. And then finally we have one more that we'll do here, where we use a Jinja file, and then we basically have salt parse that file and then send that. So let's save that, and then let's take a look at files, pillar debug 4.jinja. And it's very similar to the grains one, where we're specifying, pillar foo, salt pillar get, web server, server underscore name, web server underscore alias, website version. So we're able to specify down whatever level of keys and values we want. And then we've got another example here where we're trying to pull a non-existent key with a default value if it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay. So let's go ahead, let's clear our screen here and cat pillar debug 4. You can see, so it gives us value of bar, gives us our server name, our server alias, our website version, and then for the non-existent key, it gives us my default value. So these are just a few examples of using pillars and grains in Salt. Give it a try, let me know how you did, and if you have any problems, don't forget to leave some comments or questions below, and we'd love to help you out. I also just want to say a thank you to all the people who have subscribed, liked, and commented on my videos, and a special thank you to those that have emailed me asking if I could keep making new videos. I started making my first video about 1.5 years ago, and while it's been a struggle to find time since, I'm in the process of rearranging my schedule to make more time. So thank you again to all those that have reached out to me. As always, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you can be notified when new videos are available. If this video was helpful, please like and share. This helps show us that you find our content valuable. And until next time, automate everything.